a note to one of your circle mates or a note about how the circle was, just as a means of sharing with each other what that experience was like. Um, so I invite you to do that, offer a reflection about how circle was. And then I'm going to go on so that we get time for some questions to just very quickly talk about another notion that is important in Minnesota and in the United States regarding restorative practices. When we're doing restorative practices, it's not just enough to know how the circle process operates, but it is also important to think about your mindset, how you are approaching the work. And so the 7 core assumptions are part of that mindset work. Do I believe those assumptions? Do they operate in my world? And then here are 5 pedagogical stances from Dr. Maisha Wynn, an African-American academic from California. She wrote a book called Justice on Both Sides about restorative justice. And she maintains that as educators, we need to have a stance, how we teach, and that recognizes that histories matter. It is a true fact that education in the United States was used both as a source of liberation as well as a source of genocide and oppression. The Native people were denied their language and their customs and their cultures. Their children were taken away from them and put into boarding schools, for instance. And so that history is something that still resonates within the educational system in the United States. Histories of any country and its educational process will have an impact on the way in which your education system operates. Race matters, certainly in the United States. People of color are more likely to be, kids of color are more likely to be suspended, for instance, or to graduate at a lower rate than white students. So that is a critical component. Justice matters in that all people want to be treated with dignity. There's that word that comes back. And when we treat one kid in a kind way, even though they have done behavior that is harmful, and the other child is treated in a punitive way, children recognize that, they see that, then that doesn't give them a sense of justice. And then finally, language matters. The way in which we talk about our students, are they those students? You know, those students, or are they our students, that we see our students, our families, our colleagues? The way that we talk about each other affects our perception of them. And the final thing that she has is that futures matter. Do we see for all of our children a future of them being contributing, caring members of the community? Is that something that we can imagine for gender nonconforming children, or for children who are not majority culture children, or for children who have disabilities and learning challenges? Do we see that for all of the children? And that mindset is something that reads, because if it doesn't come from the heart, it doesn't work. So I wanted to also just note that the mindset is essential in regards to being able to repair relationships. So restorative practices, is about creating that just and equitable learning environment, building those relationships, and then repairing them. And so we need to have a mindset and skills to reaffirm relationships on a daily basis with elementary school kids, 3 times a week with middle school children, once a week with high school students, at least once a month with the staff. We need to have skills to repair relationships, to be able to use those restorative questions. What happened? What were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? Who's been affected in what way? And what needs to be done to make it better? And then if things are really tough, we need to be able to rebuild relationships, bringing a lot of folks together to solve the problem. I would tell you the story of the canoe, but I don't have time. I just want to note that I think that almost everyone in education around the world has been impacted by colonialism and the things that the different countries that have colonized different parts of the world brought in terms of education. And so the American education system is based on the British education system, certainly. And that system, the way that our formal system operates in the United States, is very much based in punishment, What was the rule and who broke it? What's the punishment? It's in the student handbook. And the administrator, the principal, or the superintendent makes that decision. But in a restorative approach, if we're going to flip it, we don't talk about what was the rule. We talk about what was the harm and who were all the people that were affected by that harm. And how do we make amends, not extract a pound of flesh from somebody, not make them feel miserable, but how do we make amends, help repair harm, and reconnect everyone back to the community? Because it is in the reconnection that we make the community stronger. A mistake in a school is an opportunity for learning and strengthening. And then finally, the decision is not made by one person, it's made by the people closest to the harm. So the students, the staff, the family, whether they're third graders, kindergartners, the superintendent, a grandfather, they all come together to help decide what's the best thing to do. And so if we were going to see that in a circle, we would bring together the person or persons who were harmed, the person or person who did the harm in the community. Sometimes we need extra support, so we bring in family and friends to support the person who was harmed, family and friends to support the person who did the harm. People from the community include the class or students or teachers or educational aides, the custodian, the bus driver. Anybody can be part of the community. And then there needs to be a facilitator or a keeper who has experience with this process and has learned about it and has practiced it with help, with support, with a mentor. And then as we're building the community in our school, we need to start at the bottom, make the foundation, which is our practices that build that restorative mindset with the adults. And probably the biggest mindset to overcome is not to think about whether or not the true self in everyone is good, wise, and powerful, but it is, can you give up punishment? Let's interrogate that. Let's think about that. What good has it done? Why do you think it works? How do you prove that it works? If you give it up, can you give it up? That is probably the biggest challenge. And then practices that build relationships. So that would be circle with the staff, circle with the students, practices that restore community, the adults in the school being able to, in the moment, say, what happened here? Okay, let's come together and talk about how we can solve this problem, just with the little things, so that you don't have to do some big problem. But if there is a big problem, a big fight, some long-term bullying, you have practices that rebuild the community that are based on that, practices that build relationships. So simple things that people talk about in Minnesota that create a restorative culture in the school, before you even do a circle, would be to call students and colleagues by name, smile at them, and show interest in their life. Ask people to take 3 deep breaths or set an intention to start any class or meeting. And imagine when you are talking to someone, especially a child, that they have the talking piece, so that you don't interrupt them, that you let them finish their thoughts. So we can go into a final reflection as people are maybe wanting to ask some questions. They can either ask a question in chat, they can turn on their what do you call it, their audio and ask a question directly, or you can share in chat what stood out for you and what's your next best step in your journey. And before we get into that, I'll just leave you with this quote from Bell Hooks. The challenge these days is to be somewhere, to belong to some particular place, to invest oneself in it, draw strength and courage from it, to dwell in community. That is what all of our children want, to dwell in community. And so we can make a healthy, caring community for them. Thank you so much for this. Chi-miigwech, in the words, in the language of the Ojibwe people, big thanks. Danke from my ancestors, the Germans. Usa Tao from the Hmong language. That's as much as I can do for right now. Let us see if we have any questions.
So thank you, Nancy, for the insightful sharing and everyone for the discussions in the breakout room. So now I think we have like 5 or 6 minutes before we come up to the closing of the sessions today. So now I think we'll open the space for everyone if you have questions or have like any experience want to share.
You could either write in chat or you could unmute. Or I can call on the person who has the cat in their picture, Vitan, to see if Vitan has anything to say about their cat. What a beautiful cat.
Hi, uh, no cat. uh, Thank you so much for your presentation. Um, I I would like to ask, what what the people involved into a harm as victims or relatives of victims can do to overcome their pain. Um, So maybe in a third party, as a third party, we can do that as an educator or judge or community leader, but the people themselves, it's a little bit hard to overcome their feeling. So how can we do with that? Thank you.
That is an excellent question. And I think it's one of the powers of restorative practices. So when we look to try to repair harm, a lot of people say the first people you go to are the people who have been hurt. And the fact that you go to them and ask them what happened, and you sit and listen to their story can be helpful. I wouldn't presume that that is necessarily healing. That's for a person to describe themselves. But I do know that people really appreciate that someone will stop and listen to them. Oftentimes, we do not take the time. I would speak for American culture. We focus our attention on the person who was hurt, on the person who was harmed, who did the hurting, and not on the person who was hurt. So just taking the time to talk to them is something that helps to uh, ease some of the pain. Um, the other thing I think that is really powerful is that people have a choice. And if people don't want to meet with someone face to face, they don't have to. And that by itself also can be very helpful because when you have been hurt, what happens is that your power has been taken away from you. And so if someone comes and says, you don't have to talk to me, okay, you talk to me, you don't have to meet with anybody else, that the choice is theirs. And that also gives strength back to the person who was hurt. I think that certainly in certain cultures, the idea of meeting with people who hurt you is an odd thing or a hard thing to think about. And in other cultures, it is maybe more common. Um, so one of the things that I've heard from around the world is that people have made accommodations, if you will, for a face-to-face meeting. So if the person who was hurt doesn't want to do that, could they have a surrogate? So if the child doesn't want to meet with the person who's been bullying them for the last 6 months or 2 years or whatever, can their older sister meet and represent them? Can they write down what happened to them and how they felt about it? And then that is read by the mother or the father or the auntie. Just knowing that your words are being shared with the person who hurt you can be helpful. That can help. And I think the other thing that this speaks to is that when we do repair of harm, we need to be very careful and we need to proceed slowly. And we need to, at every moment, make sure that people are okay. Um, and and that includes the final thing that you have to be sure that the agreements that were made in a restorative process are kept. Otherwise, that can harm the person who was hurt again. But even if the only thing that happens is that someone went to the person who was hurt and said, "What happened? I'm sorry that happened to you." That by itself can be really helpful. People have reported back just the fact that you showed care and concern for me. That by itself can help. I hope that gives you more to think about.
Thank you.
That was an excellent question.
I still have another question, but I would chat to give more space for other people. Thank you.
Thank you, Vi. I think we still have some room for one more questions if we have any.
The slides can be sent out to everyone.
Yeah, you will send the slide to everyone after this. I think we have one question from Hal.
Yes, I see. When it comes to implementing RJ in school setting, could you please give some specific suggestions on how to change the adult's mindset? So that's a great setup for the next session that is going to be offered in November. My colleague and friend Grace Yang is going to be talking about her experiences with setting up restorative practices in schools. But what I have found to be the most helpful is to require teachers to have an overview of restorative practices and to sit in circle and talk about their values and their families. I believe that people should choose, but if you don't know what you're choosing, it's not a choice, right? So you do have to give education to the teachers to help them understand. And then Grace has a story about how once a month she offered, there was circle for everybody in the school, and they did that throughout the whole school year so that they could learn how this process worked and it didn't feel so odd. Teachers like to do things that they know deeply. They like to teach things that they know deeply. And if you ask them to do something that they don't know deeply, they get really owly, get kind of irritated. And so that mindset part really, change really comes from having circle over and over and over again. And having it not about deep topics necessarily, but what did you do on the vacation that we had over winter break, for instance? Or what student do you appreciate and why? Let's just have a round of appreciations about which student you appreciate and why. And so that people can experience what it's like to wait and to speak and to listen, and then really be able to invite to listen. One of my favorite ones is to ask people, so is there a story in your family of origin or your chosen family that when you tell it, everybody laughs? Share that story. And it gives people the opportunity to laugh. There was someone in my circle, Tan, who does a lot of physical teaching, play teaching. And so having circle where people are doing things that are not based so much in words. So having circle where you're doing physical activities and you're sharing things around. Sharing a smile around the circle is kind of fun. Doing other physical activities so that you can see how you can move and connect. Also having a silent circle where you just give people pieces of paper and you give them the prompts and they have to draw their response to that. And then they pass around what their response is so that everybody can see what they said. So there are no words. And that may feel really uncomfortable for some people who don't like to draw, but then that's what we ask students to do every day. do things that maybe they don't feel so good at. So it's a good way for us to remember and also to see the capacity of other people. When we are so focused on language, we don't know that other people have real skill drawing or making something out of fuzzy sticks, pipe cleaners, or making something out of spaghetti noodles and marshmallows. Can you construct a figure that looks like a value that's important to you out of spaghetti noodles and marshmallows? So those sorts of things take people out of their hard brain and maybe move them into their heart. And I see that it is 9 o'clock.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. A great timekeeper. Yeah, what is the worst thing that when I'm being facilitators about the time? And I heard, yeah, thank you so much with a lot of the questions, with a lot of the sharings from everyone. And I also believe that how to say, a restorative practice is really like not far from what we are doing in the daily life. It's come from the small actions, like we spend time to slow down a bit. I know in the hustle and bustle life, slow down is a hard first step. But when we slow down, we can like listening, we can spend time with the things that really important in our communities. So yeah, thank you so much for all everyone here and Nancy insightful sharings. And just before we closing our sessions today, I think we would like to invite everyone just hold out for a minute to share a word that you can like feeling or want to take away after these sections, and you can put it in our chat box, and we will be sending everyone for the email for to receive a feedback. This is our first hosting the virtual webinar here, and we really happy to have everyone from like we can say it's all over the world now joining with us and sharing the insight. And it will be sessions for monthly next week. Next month, we will meet Grace, the one that Nancy mentions, that also working with her in the Minnesota Department of Education and in Minnesota schools. And we'll meet Nancy again. I think it's a opportunity for everyone, all of us, to come up with the more insightful and maybe specific practice like Nancy and everyone just sharing in our sessions today. Okay.
I look forward to seeing as many of you next month as possible. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. So I will be wishing for everyone like a good night or a wonderful day ahead and a wonderful weekend, and hope to see everyone in our sessions next month. Thank you. Oh, and okay, before we leave, I always forgot this, and I think this make me more human. That can we have a group photo before we leave? Thank you. So yeah, just kindly if everyone can open the camera, we have to remember this memory and maybe can meet next month. This will be wonderful. Okay, so yeah, we'll have us to take a photo. Thank you.
Hi.
Okay.
Yeah.
5 more seconds for everyone to open the camera if convenient. Okay.
Okay. Is everybody ready?
I think so. I saw a lot of bright smile. I will take the photo in 3, 2, 1. So good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.